Welcome, dear listener. Tonight, we're stepping off the bright, busy streets of modern life and onto an older road, one paved with stone, dust, and Roman certainty, where a single man's refusal to stay caged becomes a crisis for the most powerful republic on earth. This is the true story of Spartacus, a gladiator shaped for spectacle who turned skill into strategy, escape into uprising, and a handful of stolen blades into a war that shakes Italy from Capua to the far edges of the Alps. If this cozy story helps you drift off, please subscribe, tap like, and leave a gentle comment. Your support keeps the journey continues. If you want a modern comparison for Rome in the 1st century before Christ, imagine a city that believes it has solved the world. Not because it is kind or wise or calm, those would be harder claims, but because it is winning. Rome's roads are firm underfoot, its laws feel heavy as stone tablets, its armies are always somewhere, doing something decisive with spears and standards and very long days. And yet, like any confident machine, Rome runs on parts you don't like to look at too closely. Some of those parts wear collars. You can picture the markets, sun on marble, dust in the air, the smell of sweat and olive oil, and the steady clink of iron. Men and women are bought and sold, and the city barely notices the sound, like hearing rain on a roof and deciding it's none of your concern. Somewhere in that enormous system, between the counting of coins and the tightening of chains, there is a man the sources call Spartacus. He is described as a Thracian, from a region north of Greece, a place of ridges and forests and hard winters. The ancient writers who mention him are Roman or Roman adjacent. They are not writing a biography with loving detail. They give you a silhouette, a few lines of backstory sketched in charcoal. One says he had been a soldier, perhaps in Rome's service, perhaps against it. Another hints at desertion or capture, or the usual turning of war into commerce. A man taken, sold, renamed by ownership. The truth, if it ever sat neatly in one hand, has slipped between the fingers of history. But here is the part we can feel more clearly. Spartacus ends up in Campania, at Capua, in a gladiatorial school, a ludus. The word sounds almost cheerful, like play. In practice, it is a locked compound where men train to die beautifully. Let your mind settle there for a moment, because this is where the story truly begins. The yard is hard-packed earth, scuffed by hundreds of feet. Wooden practice swords thud and crack. A trainer's voice cuts through the air, counting, correcting, insulting with the brisk efficiency of someone paid to keep bodies alive until their scheduled moment to be torn apart. The men sleep close together, on straw that smells of old sweat and damp. The bars on the windows are iron. The doors, thick with bolts. The routines, endless. You might expect Spartacus to arrive like a thunderclap, instantly famous, instantly dangerous. The sources don't offer that kind of cinematic entrance. What they suggest instead is something quieter, and in its own way more frightening: capability. He is said to be strong, yes, many gladiators are, but he is also described as intelligent, even cultivated, which is the sort of compliment ancient writers sometimes give right before they admit they were terrified. He is the kind of person who, in a place designed to grind down individuality, still manages to remain himself. Plutarch preserves an eerie detail, a story that when Spartacus was sleeping, a snake was seen coiled around his fair, and his companion, described as a woman from Thrace, connected with Dionysian rites, interpreted it as a sign of great power and great fortune, though with a dangerous edge. It's impossible to verify. It might be legend or rumour, or the kind of story that grows whenever a man becomes larger than the records that contain him. Still, it tells you something true about how people began to see him, as a figure meant for more than the sand of an arena. At Capua, Spartacus is not alone. The names that rise out of the sources sound like drumbeats. Crassus, a Gaul, Wenemaus, Castus, Gannicus, men from different places with different tongues, all pressed into the same iron shape. In the day they rehearse death. At night they rehearse something else, conversation in the dark, plans traded in murmurs, the slow building of trust in a world built to prevent it. A gladiator school is a paradox. It exists to keep men controlled, but it also teaches them exactly how to fight, exactly how to work as a team, exactly how to keep their fear from spilling into their hands. Rome is, unknowingly, training its own disaster. The spark, when it comes, is not grand, it is practical. In 73 BCE, most accounts place it there, about 70 or so men decide they will not wait for their turn to die for entertainment. They seize what they can. The story often begins with kitchen implements, spits, cleavers, anything with an edge, because when you're enslaved, even dinner tools become a form of politics. They break out, and in the confusion they find something better. A wagon or store of gladiatorial weapons, properly made, properly balanced. Iron meant for stage slaughter becomes iron meant for real war. They run, not in a straight line, not toward a single shining idea of freedom, but away from the walls, away from Capua, away from the certainty that Rome owns their tomorrow. They head toward the bulk of Mount Vesuvius. Today, you may think of Vesuvius as the volcano that will one day bury Pompeii. In Spartacus's time, Pompeii still breathes. Vesuvius is a looming presence, wooded and rough, less a tourist landmark and more a place you might avoid if you have a perfectly good home and an uncomplicated life. For fugitives, it is excellent. High ground, cover, a place where Roman authority feels slower, heavier and less sure of itself. On the slopes of the mountain, Spartacus and his companions gather themselves. This is not yet an army. It is a band of escaped gladiators, hungry and watchful, trying to understand what they have become by refusing to stay what they were. And then, like a story responding to its own momentum, people begin to join them. Enslaved workers from farms and villas, herdsmen and shepherds used to sleeping outdoors with a cloak and a knife, the unhappy, the desperate, the bold. The world around Capua is full of wealth, and wealth is full of coerced labour. The moment someone proves that escape is possible, the idea spreads like heat through dry brush. Rome notices, but at first it notices the way a great household notices a mouse, with annoyance, not dread. A local commander, often identified as the praetor Gaius Claudius Glaber, moves against the fugitives with militia-like forces, not a full professional legion. He tries to do the sensible thing. Corner them on the Vesuvius, block the obvious way down and wait. Starve them out. Let hunger do the work. Rome loves solutions that require patience because patience is cheaper than humility. From a Roman point of view, it's tidy. The rebels are trapped on a mountain. There is a single route down, guards are set. The state can return to its other business. From Spartacus's point of view, it is an invitation. Here is where the narrative turns from escape story to war story, and you can almost hear the pace change, like a drummer shifting grip. Spartacus looks at the mountain not as a prison, but as a workshop. If the Romans are watching the path, then you don't use the path. The sources describe an improvisation as clever as it is simple. The fugitives fashion ropes or ladders from vines, wild, twisting growth pulled from the mountain itself. In the dark, when the Roman camp is lulled by the confidence of being in position, Spartacus leads his people down a steep, unexpected side of Vesuvius. They descend where the Romans aren't looking, and then, at the moment when surprise is worth more than armour, they come up behind the besiegers. It is not merely a victory, it is a lesson. The Roman force breaks, supplies are taken, weapons are gathered, confidence changes hands. A group of men who were supposed to die in the arena now stand among captured shields and helmets, listening to the sudden quiet after shouting. If you want a gentle joke in the middle of all this, it might be this. One has just been outsmarted by a landscaping project. Vines, of all things, those patient little plants that cling to stone, have helped defeat the might of the Republic. Somewhere a Roman bureaucrat is having a very bad day, and it's not even tax season. After Vesuvius, the movement grows teeth. There are more clashes, more Roman attempts to corral what has begun to feel like a spreading stain. Another commander, Publius Varinius, is associated with operations against the rebels in some accounts, and he too is defeated in a series of engagements. The details are uneven in the sources, who fought exactly where, which subordinate blundered first, what was captured when, but the overall shape is unmistakable. The rebels win, again and again, against forces that underestimate them. Each victory does two things at once. It provides practical resources: arms, food, clothing, money. And it provides something less tangible but more potent: credibility. People join the side that seems alive. Now the band is no longer simply a band. It is becoming a moving community, an improvised society under the open sky. Not everyone there is a fighter. Not everyone agrees on the future. Some want to flee Italy entirely, some want to raid, some want revenge. Some may simply want to stop being hunted and find a corner of the world where the Romans do not reach. Spartacus, in these early days, is already performing the hardest job in any rebellion, keeping a coalition together long enough for it to matter. He has to be commander, diplomat, quartermaster, judge. He has to make decisions when every decision carries risk, and when the people around him have suffered enough to mistrust promises. Imagine the camp at night on Vesuvius's slopes. Fires are small because big fires are invitations. Cloaks smell of smoke. Someone shares bread so hard it feels like it was baked during the founding of Rome. Metal is cleaned with rags. Injuries are wrapped. Voices are low, and the darkness beyond the firelight is full of trees, wind, and the faint sense that the world is waiting to see what they will do next. Somewhere in that circle of light, Spartacus sits with the weight of new iron in his hands. Maybe a captured sword, maybe a helmet that still bears a Roman sweat, turning it slightly as if to test its balance. He is no longer just a man who escaped. He is now a man who has beaten Rome in the field. And Rome, like a sleeping giant who has felt a sting, is beginning to wake. The fire you left on the slopes of Vesuvius is still there in a way. Not the exact same flames. Those have long since gone up into the night and disappeared. But the idea of them. A small stubborn light that says, "We are not where you put us." By the time the Romans wake fully to what has happened at Capua, the fugitives are no longer just fugitives. They are a moving crowd with an armed core, a kind of wandering, hungry city without walls. And Rome, which likes problems that can be solved by assigning them a neat name and a modest budget, starts to grasp that this is not a burglary. It is a war. Small at first, then inconvenient, then humiliating. After the defeat of the forces sent to pen them in at Vesuvius, Spartacus and the leaders around him do something that looks, from the outside, like simple raiding. They move through Campania and beyond, striking where they can, taking supplies, grabbing weapons, shedding pursuers. But inside the camp, it is already more complicated than raid and run, because you cannot simply be angry and feed tens of thousands of people. You have to find grain and salt and water. You have to keep the sick from collapsing on the march. You have to decide what to do with the people who cannot fight and yet have nowhere else to go. You have to turn captured Roman gear into something that fits bodies that were never meant to wear it. And you have to do all of this while the people following you are a mosaic. Different languages, different customs, different ideas of what victory should look like. If this were modern, someone would make a mission statement and put it on a wall. Out here, there is no wall. There is only the road dust and the friction of bodies moving together. Spartacus, as the sources let us see him, is a leader in motion. He is not sitting on a throne. He is walking, riding, arguing, listening. He is making choices that cannot be delayed. And in those choices you begin to sense the outlines of his strategy, or at least his priorities. One priority is obvious: survival. Another is freedom, though what that means differs from person to person. For some, freedom means leaving Italy entirely, north, over the Alps, into a world where Rome's reach thins out like smoke. For others, freedom means staying, taking, punishing, building a new life on the very soil that enslaved them. Those two ideas can travel together for a while, the way two strangers might share a road at dawn. Eventually, they want different turns, and so, as the rebellion grows, it also starts to split along lines of desire. Among Spartacus's prominent companions is Crassus, often described as a Gaul. The sources present him as a powerful figure in his own right, with his own followers, men who may have felt that their future lay not in slipping away quietly over mountains, but in taking revenge and riches in Italy, while the taking was good. You can hear, if you listen closely, how this difference could become an argument. You can also imagine the tiredness that sharpens every disagreement. Hungry people do not debate gently. At some point in 72 BCE, The rebel force divides. Spartacus continues with one part of the army, Crassus leads another. The reasons are debated, and the sources are not kind enough to provide a transcript of the conversation. You can picture it anyway. A camp in rough weather, cloaks damp, smoke in the eyes, men gesturing toward different horizons. And then the split becomes tragedy. A Roman consul, Lucius Gellius Publicola, catches Crassus's force and defeats it. In a battle some sources place near Mount Garganus in Apulia. Ancient numbers about casualties are often theatrical, designed to impress, to warn, to flatter. Still, the essential point is steady as stone. Crassus is killed, and a large part of his contingent is destroyed. For Spartacus, this is more than a military loss. It is a political shock. A coalition is not just bodies, it is relationships. It is the trust that holds when fear rises. Crassus's death makes the rebellion smaller, yes, but it also makes it lonelier. It narrows Spartacus's options and sharpens his urgency. Even if you know nothing else about this war, you can feel how leadership changes when you realise that allies can vanish in an afternoon. The sources tell a story, again with details that may carry a bit of drama, that Spartacus responded by forcing Roman prisoners to fight each other as a kind of grim funeral game for Crassus. If it happened, it fits the brutal logic of ancient warfare and spectacle. The arena's language turned back on the arena's masters. But we should hold it with a careful hand. Our evidence comes through hostile writers, and they love to paint rebels as monsters to justify the harshness that followed. Either way, something in Spartacus hardens after Crassus. Now Rome begins to throw heavier weight at the problem. The year 72 BCE brings not just one consul into the field, but two, Gellius and Gnaeus Cornelius Lentulus Clodianus. You can imagine the Senate's mood, irritated pride shifting into the kind of alarm that wears a stiff face. Rome has been embarrassed. The Republic does not like being laughed at, especially not by people it has categorized as property. The consular plan, in broad strokes, is straightforward squeeze, catch the rebels between two armies, pin them, break them, finish the unpleasant business. But war is where plans go to meet geography, weather, and human improvisation. Spartacus moves north. The sources largely agree on the direction even when they disagree on the details. He's heading up the spine of Italy toward the regions that lead to the Alps. The march itself is a feat. Picture it. Columns of people stretching along roads and tracks, wagons creaking, animals driven ahead, scouts moving like nervous shadows. They are not a uniform legion with standardized rations and fixed supply depots. They are a living thing feeding as it goes, carrying its world on its back. For the Romans, this is maddening. For Spartacus, it is opportunity. Mobility is the weapon he can afford. Somewhere along this northward movement, Spartacus defeats Lentulus. He also clashes with Gellius and defeats him as well, in separate engagements according to many reconstructions. The rebels are no longer merely outsmarting local forces, they are beating the elected top commanders of Rome in open campaigning. That fact matters. It makes senators swallow hard, it makes landowners lock doors. It makes anyone with a stake in the old order suddenly listen for hooves at night. And if you want a small modern laugh here, it is this. Rome, the Grand Master of military organisation, is learning, again, that having the job title does not automatically come with the skill set. The Republic is essentially discovering that leadership cannot be elected like a committee chair. History has a way of being unkind to resumes. Spartacus's victories create a strange kind of momentum. His army pushes into northern Italy. At this point, the story acquires one of its most haunting question marks. What does Spartacus intend? If the rebellion has a single hinge, it is here. One version of the story, one many people want to believe because it is clean, goes like this. Spartacus is trying to get his people out of Italy. North to the Alps, then over them, then dispersal into Gaul, into Thrace, into wherever Rome cannot easily pursue. This reading makes strategic sense. It turns the war into a desperate march for exit. Another version suggests something more tangled, that even if Spartacus personally favoured escape, not everyone did, that some wanted to remain in Italy, where there was wealth to take and old wrongs to answer, that the movement's size made a quiet disappearance nearly impossible, and that as victories piled up, temptation grew. temptation to do more than run. Ancient sources add another contested episode, a battle near Mutina, modern Modena, against the governor of Cisalpine Gaul, often named as Gaius Cassius Longinus. Some accounts have Spartacus defeating him as well, clearing the northern approaches. Other reconstructions question details and timing. The problem is not that historians are being difficult for sport. It is that the evidence is thin, late, and written by people with agendas. When you perform this story aloud, it is worth letting that uncertainty breathe for a moment, like a pause before the next line. Because whether Spartacus stood on the brink of the Alps, looking out at the gateway to freedom is not something we can stage with perfect confidence. But we can say this: by late 72 BCE, Spartacus's forces have reached northern Italy, and somehow through choice, pressure or necessity, they do not simply vanish over the mountains. They turn back. Think about that turn. Imagine the physical act of it. Tens of thousands of people reversing direction, the long line folding on itself like fabric being gathered. The Alps remain in the distance, cold, stony, indifferent. Behind them lies the south and Rome and all the roads they have already marched. Why turn? Maybe Spartacus believes the group cannot cross the Alps intact. Families, the wounded, the very young. This is not a light expedition with a clear trail and a friendly reception on the far side. Maybe the coalition refuses to go. Maybe Spartacus fears dispersal would mean many of his people being recaptured in smaller units. Maybe he sees an opportunity to pressure Rome more directly, to bargain, to force a political solution. Though Rome is not famous for bargaining with people it calls slaves. Or perhaps, as some narratives suggest, the war has created its own gravity. After repeated victories, the rebellion is no longer only about escape. It is also about what comes after escape, and who gets to decide. As Spartacus heads back down through Italy, the countryside changes under the march. Vineyards, fields, villages, rich estates with columns and courtyards. The rebels take what they need. Sometimes they spare, sometimes they do not. In any war, stories travel faster than armies. Romans tell each other tales that grow in the telling, because fear loves exaggeration the way fire loves dry wood. Meanwhile, within the rebel force, the strain of success begins to show. It is one thing to win a battle, it is another to win and then keep everyone fed and loyal and pointed in the same direction. Discipline matters, and so does morale. Spartacus must reward, punish, persuade. He must appear confident even when the map offers no easy endings. And above all, he must keep moving. Rome is embarrassed, yes, but Rome is also enormous. It has reserves of men, money, and stubbornness. The Republic can absorb losses that would destroy a smaller state, especially when the cause becomes personal. By turning back into Italy instead of leaving it, Spartacus is choosing to remain inside the reach of that machine. Whether he wants to or not, he is staying in the arena, only now the arena is the whole peninsula. The road dust is different in the south. Up in the broader plains and valleys of northern Italy, the air can feel wide, more room to breathe, more room to imagine escape. But as Spartacus's force moves back down the peninsula, the land begins to narrow, to funnel. Hills rise like shoulders. Coastal plains pinch into corridors. The sea appears more often, flashing silver between trees, like an eye that never quite closes. And somewhere in Rome, behind doors, beneath ceilings painted with gods, men are having the kind of conversation that always sounds calm, right until it becomes expensive. This rebellion has outgrown local fixes, it has outgrown embarrassed consuls, it has outgrown the polite fiction that it is a mere disturbance. Rome needs someone who can do two things at once, fight competently and restore Roman confidence. So the command goes to Marcus Licinius Crassus. Crassus is not a romantic figure. If Spartacus is the story's moving fire, Crassus is its cold iron pot, heavy, practical, meant to hold things down. He's rich, immensely rich, with a reputation for appetite for money, for influence, for being taken seriously in a republic where glory is a form of currency you can spend later. He has already tasted power, and he wants more. The Spartacus War is to him both a threat and an opportunity, an emergency that can be turned into a staircase. He raises new legions, he takes the problem personally, and the first thing he fights is not Spartacus. It is Roman sloppiness. By now, the rebels are experienced. They have beaten Roman forces that were underprepared or poorly led. Crassus seems to understand a simple truth. If you want to defeat people who have built their lives around refusing to be controlled, you must first control your own side. That means discipline not as a moral ideal, but as a weapon. The sources preserve a grim example of this, one of those Roman practices that sounds like it was designed by someone who thought fear should be measured in units. When a unit has failed, Crassus is said to have used decimation, the selection of one man in 10 to be executed by his comrades. Ancient writers bring this up because it signals something about Crassus's temperament. Whether the details happened exactly as told or were sharpened for effect, the point remains. Crassus is there to make Roman soldiers afraid of him as much as they are afraid of Spartacus. It works, or at least it changes the mood. Now imagine Spartacus hearing about this. How information arrives in his camp is not through official dispatches, it comes through captured men, through rumours, through the patterns of Roman movement, through the suddenly different posture of Roman patrols. But leaders learn to read the air the way farmers read clouds. Crassus is different. Spartacus's war has so far been a dance. Fast steps, sudden turns, clever uses of ground, a refusal to stay where Rome expects. Against consuls who underestimate him, that dance is enough. Against Crassus, the rhythm shifts. The dance floor is shrinking. Crassus drives Spartacus south. The why is easy. The deeper Spartacus goes into the toe of Italy, the fewer exits he has. Rome may not control every hillside, but it controls the broad logic of the peninsula. Push the enemy down, keep him there, let geography do part of the work. For Spartacus, being driven south is not merely inconvenient, it is existential. Because down there, the sea is a boundary that does not care about courage. In some reconstructions, Spartacus's aim is still to leave Italy. If not north over the Alps, then by another route. The most plausible another route is Sicily, a large island close enough to feel reachable, and with a long history of unrest and slave resistance. Sicily is a granary. Sicily has estates. Sicily has memories. If Spartacus can cross with a substantial force, he might reignite rebellion there, create a second front, buy time, perhaps even force Rome into negotiations it does not want. So he turns his attention to the Strait, the narrow gap of water between Italy and Sicily, near Rhegium, where you can look across and see the other shore. And here the story becomes almost painfully human, because it's one of those moments where grand plans meet mundane reality. Ships cost money. Sailors cost money. Timing cost luck. Spartacus is said to have negotiated with pirates, often identified as Cilicians, who promise to ferry his people across. He pays them. And then, like the sea itself having a sense of irony, the pirates take the payment and sail away. If you've ever been ghosted by someone who swore they'd definitely show up, this is that. But with boats and thousands of lives balanced on the promise. History rarely allows such neat modern analogies, yet sometimes it does, and you almost have to smile through the frustration of it. Spartacus is stranded on the wrong side of the water, staring at an island that might as well be the moon. Crassus, meanwhile, does something extremely Roman. He builds, not a grand temple, not an aqueduct, not a road, though it has the same Roman confidence in shovels and straight lines. He orders a massive fortification across the narrowest part of the peninsula near Rhegium, a ditch, a wall, an earthwork barrier meant to hem Spartacus in. The ancient accounts speak of trenches and ramparts stretching mile after mile, and even if the precise measurements vary, the impression is clear. It is a feat of engineering thrown up in a hurry, fueled by fear and discipline. Picture it at ground level. Roman soldiers with spades and picks, wet clay that clings to sandals, stakes cut from wood, their ends sharpened. The steady rhythm of labour. Dig, carry, pile, tamp. Orders barked, hands blistered, a line of fortification growing in the landscape like a scar. Spartacus now faces a kind of cage built not of bars, but of dirt and will. His camp on the southern side is crowded and tense, food becomes harder. Foraging parties risk capture. People argue. The air tastes of smoke and salt, and the sea keeps glittering indifferent, as if to say, I never promised you anything. Yet the war is not over, because Spartacus is still Spartacus, a leader who refuses to accept the neat ending Rome wants. He probes for weakness, he watches, he waits, and then, in one of the story's most vivid episodes, he breaks out. The sources describe a moment, sometimes set in a storm, or in the confusion of night, when Spartacus's people fill part of the trench, create a crossing, and surge through a segment of the fortifications. It is messy, dangerous work, the kind you do with hands and shoulders, under pressure, with the knowledge that hesitation is fatal. Not everyone makes it. Many are left behind or caught, but enough break through that the rebellion is no longer penned in the toe of Italy. The cage door has been bent wide, just a little, and a living tide has forced itself through. For Crassus, this is infuriating. He has not lost the war, far from it, but he has lost the clean containment that would have made victory simple and politically dazzling. And Crassus does not like simple being taken away from him. Now the pursuit becomes relentless. Spartacus moves again, northward, not in the triumphant rolling strides of earlier months, but in the pressured pace of someone who feels footsteps behind him. There are skirmishes, clashes, feints. Roman detachments try to cut off parts of the rebel force, to peel away the edges, to turn a mass into fragments. And here, as often happens in long, stressed movements of people, the coalition begins to crack again. Ancient sources suggest that at some point two of Spartacus's commanders, often named Castus and Gannicus, separate with a substantial group. The exact motives are debated. It could be strategic, an attempt to move faster, to raid elsewhere, to relieve pressure. It could be disagreement, over direction, over risk, over what freedom is supposed to look like now that the sea has said no and the Alps are far behind. Whatever the cause, the result is the same. Division in the face of a tightening net. Crassus catches them and defeats them. The accounts are not tender. The Romans do not become tender in this period, but you can tell the shape of the thing without dwelling on the worst of it. A separated force is easier to crush, and Crassus is not in a forgiving mood. Spartacus's position grows harsher by the week, and now another pressure joins the first. Politics. Because while Crassus is fighting in Italy, other Roman commanders are returning from campaigns abroad. Pompey, Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus the Great, and is coming back from Spain. Lucullus is sometimes mentioned as returning from the east. Rome is a republic where victories come with credit, and credit comes with power, and power comes with enemies. Crassus wants this war finished before someone else arrives to claim the final bow. Spartacus may not care about Roman career ladders in the way Crassus does, but he's not oblivious. He understands that the longer the war drags on, the more forces Rome can throw at him. More legions, more cavalry, more coordination. Time, which once favoured him, because Rome was slow to respond properly, now favours Rome, because Rome has finally decided to take the problem seriously. There is, in some accounts, a moment when Spartacus tries to negotiate offering terms. The details are uncertain and the sources are hostile, but the possibility itself tells you something. Spartacus is not merely chasing battle for its own sake. He is seeking an ending that keeps his people alive. Crassus, eager for a decisive victory and unlikely to grant legitimacy to a rebel leader, refuses. So the road narrows further. Not just the physical road, but the road of options. Spartacus continues moving north, pursued and pressured, with fewer allies than before, with more Roman steel on his scent. You can imagine the camps now. Smaller fires, quicker meals, more guards posted. The feel of iron is constant, sword hilts, spearheads, the rivets on captured armour, the nails in Roman sandals pounding the earth behind them. At the same time, something steadies in Spartacus's decisions, as if the shrinking map clarifies the mind. If he cannot cross to Sicily, and if the coalition will not, or cannot vanish over the Alps, then the war becomes about choosing the best possible last chapter. The best place and the best timing, the best chance of breaking free, even if free, is now a thinner word. Crassus, driven by ambition and fear of losing the spotlight, pushes harder. His legions are no longer cautious. They are confident, controlled, used to winning. He is tightening the net not only with soldiers, but with roads, with supply, with the steady Roman ability to do the same difficult thing again tomorrow. And far off like thunder that hasn't arrived yet, Pompey's name travels ahead of him. Morning comes the way it often does after a long campaign. Not with trumpets, not with a clean sense of destiny, but with the damp air and stiff fingers and this dull knowledge that you have to put your feet down again. Somewhere in southern Italy, Lucania in many retellings, a landscape of rough hills and winter fields, Spartacus's camp stirs. Cloaks are shaken out, embers are coaxed back into flame, iron is checked by habit, a blade's edge with a thumb that knows exactly how far it can press before pain. People speak quietly because the quiet feels like something you can still control. The end of this war does not arrive as a single dramatic curtain. It arrives as pressure, day after day. Crassus has been pressing northward, behind Spartacus, tightening the chase with discipline and numbers and the Roman talent for doing the same hard thing again tomorrow. Spartacus has broken out of traps before, through trenches, through night, through weather that turns the world into mud, but each escape costs him pieces of his force. Allies peel away, get caught, are shattered. The rebellion becomes more brittle, and brittle things don't bend, they crack. There are hints in the ancient sources of negotiations, offers, refusals, the sort of desperate diplomacy that happens when two sides want opposite things and neither wants to admit it. Spartacus, if he seeks terms, seeks survival for his people. Crassus, hungry for a decisive end and unwilling to grant legitimacy to a rebel commander, has little reason to bargain. Rome does not like to negotiate with those it insists are not political actors. To admit Spartacus can be negotiated with is to admit he is something more than property in motion. So the road narrows to a single point: battle. Ancient writers place the final clash in 71 BCE, often near a river, sometimes identified as the Silarus, though precise geography is slippery at this distance. What stays firm is the shape of the last act. Spartacus turns to face Crassus. Whether by choice or necessity, he accepts the collision that the Roman general has been chasing. If you're voicing this, let it be simple. Let the air feel cold. Let the ground feel real, because battles are not neat. They are shouting and stumbling and the terrible intimacy of people pushing into each other with weapons. Dust rises, orders are lost, courage flares and vanishes. Someone you were speaking to a moment ago is suddenly gone from your world forever, not with a speech, but with silence. The sources give Spartacus the kind of ending ancient historians like to assign to a remarkable enemy. He fights fiercely, he tries to reach Crassus, he refuses to run. One account has him killing 2 centurions before being overwhelmed. Another emphasizes his bravery and his refusal to surrender. These details may be partly literary. Rome's writers knew how to craft a noble foe, but they also fit the logic of the moment. Spartacus cannot outmaneuver forever. If his people are to have any chance of breaking through, the line must be forced somewhere, and leaders in ancient battles often led from the front, because visibility was a kind of command. And then comes one of the strangest facts in the story, not because it's unbelievable, but because it's so human. Spartacus's body is not reliably found. He dies in the crush of battle, but the man himself slips out of the record like a spark blown into darkness. For Rome, that is unsatisfying. Rome likes trophies, Rome likes proof, yet history sometimes denies even empires their neat endings. After the final defeat, Crassus has what he wants: victory. But Rome's victory is never only military, it is also a message, written in a language the Republic knows well. Thousands of captured survivors are executed along the Appian Way, the great road running from Capua toward Rome, set out in a grim line, meant to warn anyone else who might imagine freedom as something you can simply take. It is one of those moments where the Republic shows its iron heart plainly. If you're telling it aloud, you do not need to linger on the method. The point is the display. Punishment arranged as geography, terror turned into scenery. And still, even after that, the story refuses to end politely. Because Rome's leaders cannot stop competing long enough to simply agree that they are relieved. Pompey is returning to Italy from Spain around this time. He intercepts and kills or captures some rebel remnants in the north, and then, very Romanly, sends word to Rome implying that while Crassus finished the war in battle, Pompey pulled it up by the roots. It's the kind of line that makes you imagine senators nodding solemnly while privately thinking, yes, yes, wonderful. Now which of you is going to be insufferable about this at dinner? Crassus, who has done the grinding work and bled political capital into every mile of trench and every forced march, is not pleased to have the spotlight shared. Rome, as ever, turns war into career. In the end, both men benefit. The aftermath of Spartacus's rebellion feeds directly into Roman politics, helping elevate Crassus and Pompey to the consulship in 70 BCE. The Republic has survived, and it is already arranging the victory into speeches, honours and grudges that will shape the next era. And what of Spartacus? Here, the historian in you has to speak softly, because our sources are mostly written by the side that crushed him. They do not preserve his own words, his private intentions, his exact plan. We are left with outlines, a Thracian gladiator who becomes a commander, a rebellion that turns into a war, victories that shake the Republic, a leader who holds together a coalition of the desperate longer than anyone thought possible. Later centuries will remake him again and again, hero, outlaw, liberator, symbol, each age draping its own cloak over his shoulders. Yet beneath every retelling, the same hard truth remains. For a brief, astonishing time, people who were meant to be silent made Rome listen. So let the ending settle gently. Picture the Appian Way at dusk, long after the marching feet have passed. Stone underfoot, dust in the air. Somewhere, an old campfire place, cold now, still smells faintly of smoke. Iron, whether in a sword or a nail or a chain, cools as the night comes on. And the road, patient as ever, holds the memory of all those footsteps, Roman sandals and bare rebel feet alike. Until even an empire's certainty feels, in the dark, like something that could someday be questioned again. And so, our journey for tonight comes to a quiet close. The story lingers, like the last glow of candlelight, as you drift further into rest. If these gentle wanderings bring you peace, I invite you to like and subscribe so that whenever you wish, you may return and we can travel together once more. For now, dear listener, may your dreams be kind and your night be restful. Until next time,